All right, so thanks everyone. We are very excited to have Mike Moceri here with us from Maker OS. So go ahead and take it away, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you, Carmen. Welcome, everybody, to How to Make the Most Profit from 3D Printing. I'll be your host. I'm the founder and CEO of Maker OS. And a little background about me, just to kind of give you some context about why we're even doing this session in the first place and how this may be relevant for your business in one or another type of context of whatever your business is. So my background has been predominantly additive based and doing product development and design. So I co-founded a 3D printing and service bureau out of Chicago back in 2013, and we grew that business into something that was very popular within the area, and we had some national recognition. And then I started another service bureau out of Detroit, focused more on the industrial, medical, aerospace, and automotive supply chains. So I had a lot of experience in dealing with a lot of the professional, tier two, tier three suppliers around Detroit and dealing with some of the OEMs. But my passion was really the independent inventors that I think a lot of the other, small to medium sized service bureaus within the audience today will deal with. And being able to handle the design, prototype, and production of those products from start to finish. And the ultimate goal was eventually to help these entrepreneurs or startups get their products out into the market. And I particularly loved those types of clients because you get to see a lot of the cool things behind the scenes of new product ideas and innovations. But I spent a lot of my time, mentoring other companies, not just our clients, but in general, just in the startup community around Detroit and in New York, mainly around fundraising, since I have experience bootstrapping businesses and bringing them to venture-backed startups. And I also was a mentor at the Stanley Black& Decker and Techstars Additive Manufacturing Accelerator out of Connecticut. So I got a lot of experience and built a network of people around me that really have kickstarted this industry from 2010 and onwards. A lot of the legends within the industry have had a lot of FaceTime with and worked with projects with them on that. And we've been able to create kind of a great community with Maker OS and the clients that we have. And I think a lot of the lessons that I learned in mentoring our clients are going to be applied to our conversation today. So, kind of transitioning into the meat of the presentation, we're going to start talking about how to optimally price and to make the most profit from your 3D printing business. So I'll actually ask Carmen to launch the poll that we have. And the first poll that I have is, how do you currently quote your current clients? Just to kind of read the room. I'd like to understand, how people are going in and basically quoting with either spreadsheets using an automated quoting system or some other method. So if you go down into the how do you quote right below me down here, you'll be able to see some voting. So we'll kind of wait until the poll is over after a few more seconds here. So really the important thing that I want to get out of this is a lot of folks will do one of a few things. The spreadsheet method is very time consuming sometimes, as well as kind of guessing what your competitors are using. So sometimes it can be pretty difficult to kind of gauge where you're at within the market, but more importantly, what your true value is. So I hope that once we go through this, we can kind of see how we can implement these strategies that I show you for pricing and how to build more profit, but as well as how you can optimize your entire quoting process. So we don't have too many votes here, so if we can get a few more people voting down in there, that way we can just kind of get a couple more. Just wait a second or two here. So we'll come back to that, and I'll come back to this point. So it's not a tremendous amount of data that we have here, but it seems like a lot of folks use slicing, spreadsheets, and just kind of guessing and what competitors. So that's typically what happens here. So what I'm going to go ahead here is I'm going to go ahead and just end the poll real quick. And I'm going to go ahead and reshare my screen. We'll get back into the presentation here. So before you know how to quote and how to apply different strategies for pricing and how to optimally price for your service, I think it all comes down to understanding what your true costs are of fabrication for your service. So that means, what your general overhead is, as well as some of the additional things that you may not account for in traditional pricing calculations and so on. And a lot of times when I see people attempting to do this, they'll try to get down really into the weeds about different metrics or variables. And I've seen these spreadsheets that are absolutely insane, multiple pages with pivot tables and all that. However, you don't need to get that crazy into it. You can just really dial into the most important metrics. And I think that's really what we've accomplished with our free 3D printing pricing calculator. And we're going to run through that a little bit here. And I'll give you an example of a business and how to run through this calculator so that we can determine what our underlying costs are. And then we'll have the discussion about how to build profit and margin on top of that. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is switch over to our 3D printing pricing calculator. So if you want to view this, you can go onto our website, makeros.com, and we have the pricing calculator. But what I'm going to run through here real quick is an example of a business, and I'll give the example of my business when I had it in Detroit when we were running the service bureau for professional clients. So there's a lot to kind of look at in a lot of these different tabs in here and inputs, but a couple of the most important values that we want to get out of this, the outputs, are your total hourly costs of fabrication, and as well as what the actual margin you can bake into that. So I'm going to start this very linearly, and we're going to work our way down. And I'm going to spend about 10 to 15 minutes just kind of explaining the methodology and some of the philosophy behind this, because I think some of the determination of what you should calculate within your cost model of what you're incurring for your business can sometimes be subjective, and there's a lot of different methodologies and strategies. But this is the one that we employ with MakerOS and with our clients, and we've proven that this model has been very successful for those who have run through this. So I'll give you the example of real numbers that I used for my business out of Detroit. So we're going to make some assumptions here about the service that I had and what I was actually providing. So you're going to notice a few inputs here. So purchase unit. So this means the type of machine we have to be cognizant of this too would be an FDM machine that I had purchased. And I was using polycarbonate ABS material since I was offering that to automotive and aerospace since they needed the high impact and heat resistance of that material. So when I purchased this material, I would buy it by the kilogram, and it was $100 per kilogram. And we need to understand the density or the gravity of the material so that we understand how much of that material we're going to be using over a period of time. So this is sometimes I've seen a lot of rookie mistakes of entrepreneurs that are just first starting off. They'll just do this calculation right here, and they'll just assume that their cost of fabrication is 10 cents, which is obviously not that. And you don't want to be charging by the gram for just your raw material costs and adding some arbitrary margin on top of that. You're really going to just leave yourself behind, and you'll see all the other costs that we're going to calculate going through this here. So the next tab, we have some assumptions about the machine, and we're going to calculate the cost of the machine, its depreciation, and how much you're spending on service and maintenance on an annual basis. So I had purchased that machine for $10,000. That was my initial principal investment in that machine, since it was kind of it wasn't necessarily a prosumer machine. It was kind of getting into more of the production territory and made quite a few modifications to it. Now, the machine lifetime hours, this is, again, somewhat of a philosophical point in how people determine machine depreciation, where some do it by on a 24-hour cycle with however many days there are in a year, so on and so forth. My methodology in calculating this is I start with how many years am I realistically going to keep this machine, and I determine how many working days there are within a year, and my machine utilization rate on an annual basis. So if you have historical data for this number, that's fantastic. You're kind of ahead of the race here. And a good easy way to do this, and I'll kind of bring up my handy dandy calculator here, is to make a couple of assumptions here. And I'll do this based on the United States. We have roughly 260 working days a year, right? Times an 8-hour workday. So within a year, there is a possible 2,080 hours of work. Now, I don't do this on a 24-hour cycle, and I don't include weekends because I come from the philosophy of if one of your clients were to incur these costs, and if you were to look at your costs on your financial statements for your profit and loss statement, you're more than likely going to be calculating costs on an hourly basis for how long you're actually open your doors for how many days your business is open. So if I'm looking at 2,080 hours annually, and when I was, first starting out, my machine utilization rate was pretty low. So I would say, roughly 50%, so times zero point 0.5. So I was really only utilizing about 1,000 hours, a little over 1,000 hours annually on that machine. And typically what I do, and of course you all have been in the industry and have purchased machines and maybe have been around for a while, technology advances pretty fast. So I typically only keep my machines for about 4 years. So if I did 1,040 times 4 years, I have 4,160 lifetime hours on that machine until I'm either replacing it or throwing it away or selling it or so on until it depreciates down to zero. So I just used the rough, estimation of about 4,000 lifetime hours on that machine, which gives us down to $2.50 for depreciation per hour. Now you also want to consider the maintenance on that machine. It's easier if you have a maintenance package if you buy it from either the OEM or a reseller, and you can put that number in here. And that's what I have inserted here, was just the annual cost of the subscription for the service plan, which included replacement nozzles, beds, wire harness replacements, and so on. But if you don't have a service plan, you can also try to calculate how much of your actual time is spent on maintaining that machine, along with any other additional consumables. And you would add that number there. So where we're getting at is, we're getting at $2.76 for the machine time and service cost per hour. So that's an important one to keep in mind here. Now, one of the most important ones is the fabricated material tab in this calculator. Is what we're attempting to do here is we're assuming in this cost model, we want to assume your most average slicing profile for this machine. So in this case, I'd be printing at a 0.2 layer height with a 0.4 millimeter nozzle. I was, again, printing in PC ABS, and I wasn't printing that fast. It's probably like medium settings or so. So the example that we give here is how long does it take to fabricate 1 cubic centimeter cube? So you can print out a 10 by 10 by 10 millimeter cube, actually physically print that cube out and time how long it takes. And what we're actually doing is getting the material deposition rate for this type of machine. And from the actual numbers that I have was about 11.5 grams per hour is what I was on average pumping out of that machine. And that's a very important number, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Now for the facility, this is very easy to kind of calculate. I like putting in my fully loaded rent in my costing model, mainly because, again, I come from the philosophy of if a client were to do this themselves, they would incur the cost of having rent to pay and utilities. So I like to put that loaded cost since that was what my business was. It was a 3D printing service. So in Detroit, we got a pretty decent rent. We basically had 1,200 square feet for $1,200. Good price, couldn't argue with that. And we had awesome internet and everything. So our utilities were a little higher than normal for the area. But all in all, we basically based this on a per month basis, and we boil it down to an hourly basis of what your facility costs are. So we're adding on top of the fabricated material, the machine, and the facility. Now we cannot ignore the labor costs. Labor costs are extremely important in this calculation because, of course, the machines just don't load themselves and they're not automatically printing all the time. It requires human intervention to start up the machine, slice the file, and take the parts off the machine. Maybe eventually we'll have more automated systems for bed ejection, but for my particular machine, it required paying myself at about a $40 per hour hourly wage. So it took me only about 30 minutes in total to set up the machine, slice, print, and take the part off the machine, which means that on a per print job basis, it was costing the business about $20 per print job. So that's another important metric. Now, another one, when you're first starting off your business, you can be pretty intimidated by software costs. Software sometimes is not cheap, especially in this industry when you have very specialty and niche products, especially in the CAD or within the file analysis realm of things. Those of you who use, I'm not going to call out any specific industry name softwares, but there are ones that cost, $4,000 for a CAD license. Others for a file fixing and analysis program can be up to $11,000 a year for file fixing, measurement, and so on and so forth. But what I did in my first years of business, I basically had a software profile that looked like this, where this is the type of software that I was paying for. And what you want to do is also consider all the other costs incurred from your infrastructure for your website, your email services, project management system. All those different things add up. So what we do is we boil that down and we calculate what does that cost the business on an hourly basis, which is an additional $4.04. So I go through that long-winded explanation of the left column to point out to the right here in showing what our calculated total hourly costs are, which is the equivalent of $10.03. So that's just our baseline total hourly costs to run the machine that I had, given all the other parameters that I outlaid before. So what does it actually cost to fabricate that entire kilogram of materials? So this is kind of a cool way to think about, what is the true cost of fabrication? And then within the spreadsheet that we're going to share with you, we're going to do some further analysis on the following. So there are, of course, 1,000 grams in a kilogram. If we say that the fabricated material, if we're printing 11.5 grams per hour, that means that within, how long does it take to fabricate all of the grams, so 1,000 grams? It's about 86.96, about 87 hours of print time to print one entire spool of that material, 1 kilogram, right? So the cost of fabrication is the following, of that actual spool to print it. It's the 86.96 hours multiplied by the hourly cost, which gives us $872, right? So a lot of people are very surprised by this number. This is a far cry from just saying that the material cost is 10 cents a gram, right? It's different to say, those spools right above my head over here, to say that the value of them, or the cost of fabrication, is over $800. And that's kind of eye-opening to a few people. Now, the next step here is we want to calculate the approximate human labor cost on a per kilogram basis of fabricating that entire kilogram. So what we do here is we say, and you can actually do this in looking at your past 10 slice jobs that you did, or print jobs. Go into your slicer and you can actually calculate how much material usage there was, or you can actually physically measure it with a scale. So in this example, on average, each print that I was doing, each print job was about 100 grams. So 100 or 1,000 divided by 100 is 10. So if I take 10 print jobs multiplied by the human cost is $200. So the actual total cost of fabricating 1 kilogram of that PCABS in that machine that I had was just over $1,000. Now, thinking about that, again, that can be very surprising to folks. And this boils down to, we really ultimately want to figure out, what can we charge and how can we bake in some margin into that in order to figure out the optimal range in pricing, in profit. So if I go down here, let's just kind of take a look at some break-even costs here. This is, assuming a 0% markup, this is what the cost is onto the business in order to print. Now, back then, I didn't realize this, but again, through my professional journey and learning, I was way, way, way underpricing myself for this type of service. And that was due to not necessarily understanding the costs. Until you get enough experience to understand what goes into running a service bureau, you can then kind of develop a tool that we have right here. So assuming a 0% markup, we're showing that it's about $12.33 per hour. And what a lot of you are maybe familiar with is maybe charging by gram or by cubic centimeter, about $1.23 per cubic centimeter. Now that is on the baseline cost. If you're charging anything lower, you're losing money. And unfortunately for me, when I first started out in Detroit and with that service, printing this out, I started charging basically at $10 an hour. And as you can see, that's just not even breaking even here considering my labor costs. So I was losing money on each print job. And as I did the financial analysis after a few months, I started to realize, I'm leaving a lot of money on the table. So something that people tend to do within the industry is to do a cost-based pricing strategy, meaning they will take the total cost of what it takes to fabricate something or to provide a service, and then apply kind of what they think is a industry standard 30 to 40% margin on top of what they should price at. Now, that is a method of old, and it is not a exact science at all, and it's very close to just guessing. In fact, I probably think it's worse than just guessing because you're just following something that somebody may have heard of that might be an industry quote unquote standard in other industries. So what we ultimately want to do is to figure out how to make this more optimized. How do we reduce some of our overhead, but how do we also figure out some of our value? So with that portion of figuring out what our baseline costs are, we're going to start talking about going into value-based pricing beyond just pricing based off of adding a margin on top of what your costs are. So value pricing, there are different methodologies to this, and there are different considerations. Personally, I think that the value pricing model should be based upon what is beyond the printed part itself. What went into the service side of providing that printed part? Was there a lot of hands-on service? Was it automated? Did you provide a lot of phone contact with that client? Did you provide any engineering services with that? On top of that, it's not just the quality of customer service, convenience, but it's also your branding and your presence. So people want to work with a business that is professional. They don't want to go with a nameless print shop that has no provable or verifiable experience or clout. So there needs to be investment on your end in order to build that brand equity and build the quality of customer service for your clients, which will allow the perceived value of the client coming to you to be more than just standardized or in a cut above your competition. The other side of it too is the overall utility of the service. It's not just the perception, but it's also the utility. What extra value are you giving to your client? Meaning, and you can kind of do rough estimations and calculations of this, is kind of what we did with the cost model, is saying if your client were to do this type of service, what sort of investment would they need to make in order to provide this print at the quality that you are able to do it? So they will need to consider their seniority and experience of engineering and fabrication and manufacturing, but also, design for additive manufacturing and printing for additive manufacturing, as you all know, is fairly tough. There's a lot to consider in orientation and print settings and slicer settings. And if you're doing SLS or SLA printing, proximity and surface area, all those certain considerations all come with, what I call internal FEA or mental FEA analysis, but also has to do with your investment in other softwares that can help automate those things. So what we're going to go through here in the spreadsheet coming up is trying to find your pricing opportunity and trying to calculate what value you bring to the table versus just doing a cost-based pricing strategy. So we're going to look into the spreadsheet here in a second, and there's going to be some other assumptions and other cost and value projections within there. And I want you all to kind of go into the lens of looking at this additional spreadsheet beyond the calculator as a tool that you can modify yourselves, add other calculations, beat it up, slice it up, add your own flavor to it, basically. So what I'm going to do, though, is just show you my tips and recommendations of how I would approach it. And what you can actually do is use a lot of these outputs into the actual MakerOS software in order to account for other variables like the geometry of the file, batch printing, so on and so forth. So let me go ahead and I'm going to bring up the spreadsheet here. So here's the spreadsheet. And again, there's a lot of other fields here, just as there were within the calculator, right? So what I'm looking at here in this scenario is basically the outputs that were from the calculator in this example here. So I had entered in this spreadsheet here the costs that the business would incur providing the service with that type of machine, with PCABS, and so on and so forth. So we're going to do a further analysis of the outputs that we saw right here. So what the total cost of fabrication, how long it takes to fabricate something. So let's dive into that. and kind of put this into perspective, right? So if at this model, if we're saying that, and we enter in these inputs here, we want to the projected lifetime units fabricated. And really what this means is how many kilograms of material are you going to be printing with that machine, given however many hours you are going to be printing with it, right? So if we use this example here, basically what we're saying is that there's going to be 44, 45-ish spools or kilograms of material that I'm going to be printing with that machine, which again is the equivalent of 4,000 print hours. And again, it's going to take about 89.3 hours to print one spool, right? So what that means in the lifetime cost of the material is that if you just follow the calculation here, it's 44.8 multiplied by $100 for that material. So it's going to cost the business over a period of 4 years, essentially $4,500 in material cost. Now the lifetime human cost, what we do here is since we've calculated the cost of the human intervention in setting up the slice and taking the parts off and so on, is going to be about almost $9,000. And the reason why we calculate that as lifetime is since there are 44.8-ish spools, and if it costs about $200 of human time to print each spool, that's going to be about $9,000-ish to fabricate for the lifetime of the machine for human cost. Now the total lifetime cost is the following. So if I want to find out the $49,080 to actually print with that machine, right? So that way we're calculating, what it actually costs to use that machine within the amount of time that we're going to keep it in and run that machine, which is about 4,000 hours, right? So we're going to say that it's going to be about four operational years, as we mentioned in our earlier example. And the cost per year, if we're dividing by 12 or by 4, that's $12,000 per year and a little over $1,000 per month. Now, thinking about your costs in that way kind of changes your perspective of how you might want to approach the true value of the service that you're providing, and also trying to determine what margin you can apply to that. So one thing that we did here, and this is kind of again, a philosophical point here, is basically determining the ratio between your overhead costs and your fabrication costs, and determining, the difference between the two, and adding a potential markup for that. And the reason being is, again, I come from the philosophy of if a client were to incur these costs, they would need all the professional, expert human experience and the knowledge and know-how how to use the software, along with being able to how to configure the space itself and how to even just run the operation. Not necessarily the machine running itself. That's what this number is here. That's the fabrication costs of the hourly cost to run the machine and the material on an hourly basis, as opposed to the overhead costs are your software, your human, and your actual facility costs. So that's a difference of 156%, right? So we can imply that the additional value that you're providing is there. There is additional value beyond the print itself, right? Now, another thing too in value-based pricing is some of those key metrics that I mentioned before about presentation, branding, so on and so forth, really come down to some of the following. And again, this is based upon a scorecard that I would rank myself when I first started my first 3D printing business, in determining what a potential margin could be on top of that. And this is a medium unoptimized way to look at how I can optimize my margins and profit with the business itself. So the reasoning for this scoring between 1 and 5 is basically to tally it up to get a max score of 35. And you want to compare your total score and seeing how you rank. And then you can add that to a potential margin on top of what your costs are to have the value added margin on top of that, right? So when I first started, so within the first few months, there was basically no branding of my service. I listed myself on a few online marketplaces, and there really wasn't a good website. It was just a contact form, right? And that shot off onto an email. So I would mark myself 1 for a branding and a 2 for customer service, because I was handling all of my orders through email and through the phone, right? So that's not a very modern way to conduct business in today's age. And same with convenience. If you are requiring your customer to email you constantly without an online platform, you're really missing out a lot on the convenience score here, because if you have a platform, the customer can self-service and you become more efficient in not having to spend a lot of time on the back and forth and either quoting or giving them updates on the project, so on and so forth. And then again, too, on quality, the reason why I marked myself a 2 out of 5 here was because when you first start out, you're just figuring out how to use the machine. And as you dial it in after however much time you need in order to really get high quality results, then you can mark yourself higher, up towards a 5. And then same with seniority and team experience, and going and looking at that basically revolves around how long have you been in the industry? What would, if you were to go out somewhere else and get a job in this field, what would your hourly rate be? Or how does your skill set compare to others out in there in the market? Are you exceptional? Are you kind of wishing that you had a little bit more experience or skill? Could you learn more? Or if you're very new to it, you might have a lower score here. Now, the last point here, commodity versus service, this is an important one to score yourself at. And I would say a commodity type of service is basically a 1. And the reason why I would mark that as a 1 in the profile of that type of business would essentially be a business that's just maybe 3D printing 1 or 2 type of objects in a print farm, where they're very low touch, they're not having to do a lot of hand holding with clients, and they're just hitting print, repeat, and they're not really printing a variable amount of objects. So that's more commoditized, as because if you do high volume printing, all of a sudden your clients are going to be looking at other high volume producers, and there's going to be more price competitiveness there, as opposed to if you're more service based. And the more service based you are, and ranking yourself closer to a 5 would essentially be more boutique type of service, bureau type of work, where you're actually working to develop with the design and prototyping and maybe the production side of things. So if every print job that you get through your doors is a custom job, I would rank yourself closer to a 5, and also the quality of it. So again, this is, starting out, given the metrics that I had of the cost that I was incurring and what I would rank myself, I would only score myself at about a 40%, which again, in turn, what I would add this 156%, again, from that philosophy of other value add beyond the print, along with my value metric score, I would get a suggested value added margin of 196%. So let's look at that. Let's just see, even with this low optimized model of value-based pricing, how that would change what I had here, right? So if I assumed 0% margin, and if my break-even price was only going to be $12.33, if I was pricing much lower than this, lower than $10 an hour, I was definitely losing money. But how much potential was I actually leaving on the table? So I'm going to add the 196%. I'll just round 196. So that brings me towards a much more reasonable number, especially for the type of machine, the type of material, and the type of service that I was actually offering. Although there is still more that we can do for this model here. And the reason being is, let's just take a look at this. And again, some of you might be skeptical of this pricing, maybe thinking it's too high. And the reason is, yes, it is with this value calculation, because there's a lot of value, right? You're not just some nameless shop. You want to build your business into a professional service that provides excellent quality to your customers, right? So there's more than just the print itself. And especially for the clients that I was serving, again, this has to relate to the market that I was serving. Charging $36 an hour would not be out of the question for automotive, aerospace, or medical clients for PCABS type of parts, or looking at the other metrics, about $3.65 a cubic centimeter, so on and so forth. So I personally today I would feel fairly confident with this, but I still think there's more that we can do. So let's go back a little bit and look at some further analysis of this. What does this actually mean if I have 196% margin for my service? So let's go down here. So that means that the total lifetime value of owning that machine for 4,000 hours, right? So let me calculate this here. I'll show you the cells. So C13 multiplied by 1 plus C38 is going to give me $145,000. So you can use this example as maybe financial projections if you're starting your business, or if you're looking for the next year, in how to maybe forward project how much you could make or what the potential is if you were running this machine at your optimized machine utilization rate. So that means right here that if my cost to run that machine there was basically 50,000, but I was the value of 145, that means that my profit over the lifetime of owning that machine is almost $100,000, given this value matrix and ratio calculation, right? So that means my yearly profit with that one machine is about 24,000, monthly 2,000, and the value of material, which means the value of that spool, is no longer, I spent $100 to buy that spool of material, but we calculate that value of being over $3,000. And that's shown here within the calculator, right? Where if I put in that markup of 196%, we'll see that it bumps up the quote unquote, what the actual value or the retail price of that spool is valued at is over 3,000. So kind of think about that for a second. We realized, and I mentioned a few minutes before, that the total cost to fabricate the material is about $1,000. So if you look at that spool, look at a spool that's around you. That spool is going to cost, in this example, over $1,000. But the value of it, what I can basically profit off of that, is $3,000. So I'm making a pretty good margin here with 196%, but I think we can do better. Now, the better example is the following here. I use the same parameters here for print costs, so on and so forth, for the material and for the machine. That hasn't changed. Machine depreciation, so on. What did change, though, which is a very important metric to look at, is fabricated material. So just by optimizing your print speeds, let's say by printing a cube 1 minute faster, basically means that you're able to print more in less time, right? So that is a difference between a material deposition rate of 13.8 grams to or from 11.5. So I'm printing more in less time because I optimized my quality and print settings, right? Now, facility settings haven't changed, and same with human costs. But what did change, though, are some of the software costs. Because let's look at this example here. When I first started off, I was paying $8,400 annually for software. But because we were using Maker OS to run the business after, we were able to reduce a lot of the overhead costs that I normally would have had to spend on a bunch of other softwares. So we go from an hourly cost of $4.04 down to $2.50. That's, over time, that's a significant amount of savings, right? So if I look at my total hourly cost with these optimized settings by A, optimizing my print settings, and B, optimizing my overhead costs for software and other services that I was using, I go from an hourly cost of slightly over $10 down to $8.72. So, we're talking about dollars and cents here, but you compound this over thousands and thousands of hours of print time, you will save thousands and thousands of dollars on cost, which further increases your margin. You with me? So now let's also talk about the types of print jobs you do. So when I first started, I was doing a lot of print jobs and I wasn't batching my prints together. So what that means is if I say how many print jobs per unit, meaning how many print jobs can I get out of a kilogram of this PCABS, I was optimizing my prints by plating more parts on the tray so that I didn't have to print as many print jobs anymore. And I got more confident in my failure rate was also reduced. So it go from 10 print jobs down to 8. So I'm saving about $40 per spool right there too. So that means the total cost to fabricate in an optimized setting goes from over $1,000, $1,072, down to $792. So let's look at an optimized setting here. So we're going to take those same parameters that I entered in the optimized method, and I entered them in the spreadsheet here. And we're going to go further down here in the ratio calculations. You can see is still around 150 or so here because there is more value of the human time and expertise that I'm providing beyond the print itself. But also let's talk about the value metric score here. So this value metric score is basically going to look at, again, my optimizations to my branding. Maybe I built a website with Squarespace. I also increased my level of customer service and convenience because I adopted a system like MakerOS so that I can house all my projects, files, and billing all in one place. And I'm also winning on convenience for my clients so that they can self-serve themselves, get instant quotes, and so on. I've also increased my quality because over time you get used to using your machines, or maybe I bought a more impressive machine that has, better quality settings or a better material at a similar price point from a different vendor. And also you gain some experience and so on. And I scored myself a little higher here in an optimized setting to cater more towards service based rather than being more commoditized in volume printing. And again, the more you focus on service boutique style of service, there is actually more margin in that type of business than doing a commodity based type of service where a lot of the times you have 50 different competitors, it's a race to the bottom on price. I don't like playing in that space personally. Others can play in that space very well depending on their optimized operation, whether how they built their print farm or so on. But I like providing very high quality parts with high quality of service. And that score increased, by the way, from that 30% up to 77%, or was that 40%? Now I increased it by 30 odd percent. So my suggestion margin here went from, let's go to our medium optimized settings, from 196 up to 224. So I'm going to add that to the calculator here. So what does that mean if I put 224 markup here? So I'm going to start increasing the value of the actual, or the amount of margin that I can add on top of the actual parts itself. So if my costs are lower, I can also add more margin on top of that, right? So it wouldn't be out of the question in considering the difference between the $10.03 versus the savings of the $8.72 in the service that I was providing before. I can add even more margin on top of this to be even more optimized in my pricing. And ultimately what it comes down to is what is your customer able and willing to afford and able to spend with you? But also you have to understand from a business perspective, is there enough market to price the way that I want to? And is that a sustainable model, moving forward X amount of years? So if it were me, and if I had these parameters again with the same machine, with the same parameters that I have, and if I had these different quality metrics within here with the value metric scorecard in the optimized setting, I would also consider how much I'm saving on the business on my optimized settings, and I would probably add an additional 30 to 40% to this. So if I would add 250% markup here, this is something that I personally would probably price printing PC ABS with if I had that machine again. I'd be anywhere between $35 to $42 an hour in my printing costs of what I would charge to my customer, or so on and so forth. So that adds much more value and in turn creates much more profit for you and for your business, right? So let me go back here to the presentation here. And we took a look at a not so optimized scenario, an optimal scenario, and hopefully I gave you some tips and tricks and philosophy behind some of that reasoning, right? So some last thoughts here and some key important points, beyond what we just did here in the work that I showed you. You have to test, you have to iterate, never just pick one method. Don't follow my word for word and only use the parameters that I showed you here. Make sure you validate them for your business. And if you see that customers, if you're not turning away customers, by the way, on price, if you're providing a high quality service, because people are saying that it's affordable, you can have more wiggle room to increase pricing until you start to get pushback, so you can test and iterate and find that kind of perfect balancing spot for a consistent and strategically sound pricing model, right? And I think one of the the most important thing in my mind is focusing on value of your business and not just setting up a print shop with a few printers and printing things for people. What are you and your team going to provide to your clients that is beyond the part itself? What is your customer experience like? Is it convenient? Are they able to go into an online system and track the progress of the projects and collaborate with their team? But also on yourself from a manager's perspective of how am I going to manage all that work? What are all the other systems that I normally wouldn't need to spend on and string together as opposed to just getting a consolidated solution? Now, there is another way, beyond the value-based pricing model and kind of testing an iteration or cost-based pricing strategy is account-based pricing. Now, account-based pricing is most appropriate for those who are servicing, tier two, tier one, high-end type of clients that are probably spending tens of thousands of dollars or more, right? Because at that point, you're basically providing custom pro formas and custom statements of work to that client. And it's a much more custom way to approaching either the development or a production run for a client. So in an account-based pricing methodology, you would be pricing one client for this, maybe a similar type of service versus another client with a similar service at a different price point because they may either require a little more or they might be a very large company that can afford to spend a little more. So you're kind of finding your sweet spot, not just in the value-based pricing, but also account-based pricing if you have high-end clients. And you can still apply the value-added pricing strategy to an account-based pricing model, where you can adjust the value depending on what client that you're servicing. So it's kind of food for thought here, right? So I'm going to leave it at that. I know that's a lot to cover in looking at the pricing calculator, the spreadsheet. It's a lot of technical speak, but what I'd like to do is open it up to Q&A right now and to see if any folks have some questions. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my presentation here. That way I can get back into the presentation. So I will be right back, folks, and I'm going to relaunch here and I'll be right back.
Go right ahead, Mike. And while Mike is getting set up for the Q&A, go ahead and add any questions that you have to the chat, and we will respond to them. We've had a few come in, and we would love to hear from the rest of you. So let us know what specific questions you have. And one person asked if the spreadsheet will be available, and it will be shortly. So as Mike joins us, go ahead and add any questions and we will get set up. Let's give us 1 second here. Mike, we're going to go ahead and make you a presenter, and then you can go ahead and turn on your camera and mic again.
All right.
Welcome back. So, so we've got a really good question about one of our viewers liked that you were focusing on customer perception as a way of figuring out cost. And he said that the one big question he has is, he says, I'm starting out with basically no budget and 4 consumer level machines, 2 SLA and 2 FDM. I recognize this is peanuts, and I want to know, what advice do you have to grow and develop to the next level?
Well, first of all, I would say to, his name is Steven, I would say to Steven that I don't think that's peanuts. I think that is a really great start. The fact that you have 4 machines with varied capability and materials that you can produce with, you can build an actual very successful service bureau with those types of machines if you have the right clientele in providing the right level of service. So the advice to grow and develop to the next level, I would say, is definitely focusing on branding and web presence in a local area, given a specific type of community. So what I advise a lot of my clients on, either with their first starting off or if they're looking to expand their business, is to put user research stories, basically customer stories, in developing the type of personas that you want to sell to. For instance, if you are in, let's say, in the Midwest and you want to, I'll use my example, if you want to cater towards automotive, if you're just starting off with those types of machines that are desktop style, you might not initially get a tier 1 supplier, or you might not get Chrysler, Ford, or Jeep, because they require a lot of experience and a certain done in Bradstreet score, so on and so forth. But what you can do is do customer personas based on other suppliers within the area that supply other suppliers. So you want to do some data gathering, data research on how many companies there are, and seeing if you can build either a website or a landing page in that local area that speaks to the types of needs that those folks might be searching for, right? Google and Bing are the gatekeepers of search and discovery, right? But it's up to you in order to make yourself discoverable. So if you build a website, and I don't recommend building something completely from scratch. I think if you are just starting out, I think Squarespace or Wix are fantastic options, and you'll be able to really kind of build something really quick, a MVP, a minimum viable product of that website, and you'll be able to test and iterate and be able to see if you're getting more hits depending on what landing pages you offer. Which, by the way, if you see more traffic on one page, let's say catered towards automotive versus, let's say, aerospace, that might be indicative of the types of machines that you might want to invest in to expand your capability, right? So what I mean by that is automotive guys love ABS. So you might want to invest in more either ABS material or ABS capabilities, as opposed to aerospace, which require very high-end materials, high temperature, peak, or metals. So that's kind of a way to gauge investment in how to take yourself to the next level. So I hope that answered that question.
I think it did. We've got another one. Customers generally ask for discounts. How much should we reduce the margin?
Yeah, so when a customer asks for a discount, I would first ask the question, why are they asking for the discount in the first place? Do they not see the value in the service? Or are they a legacy client? Is it somebody that you're looking to attract to win business versus them going to a competitor? I think there are different either coupon or discount strategies as well beyond just your general pricing strategy. So if you get a lot of clients that are saying that they want discounts, I would assume that they might either be education based or they might be nonprofit type businesses. And you would probably have to gauge, if I do give this customer a discount, what is my opportunity cost if I get another job in? Am I going to be losing money if I print their jobs? But another thing to consider too is, do they have the ability to do more work with you in the future? So I think you test it out. That's also a testing and iterative process in seeing how much margin you're able to kind of break down. I think a lot of that has to do with, of course, your costs as we went over, but also what additional value are you providing that you're accounting for in your margin that you can kind of scale back. So, obviously people, typically, as a straight answer would basically say like initial introductory offer 10% off, so on and so forth. However, I would use personally a discount for an incentive to do more business with you. So you could say, I'll do this job for 15% off if you also commit to another order with us with a different material, so on and so forth. Or you could basically bundle other services with that. So you could say we can have advanced CAD analysis of mechanical mechanical feasibility for the parts as they're printed as an additional service onto it, but you could also discount the price of the printed part. So it seems to the customer you're adding value, which you are, and you're giving them a discount at the same time. So that shows a lot of good faith to them.
Very sound advice. We have a couple more questions, and we've got a few more minutes. So last call for questions. Go ahead and get them in now. And if not, I'm sure that you can follow up with Mike. So going back to the polling questions on how you quote clients, how does that factor into these calculations? What do you think is the best way to quote?
Yeah, I think it's a hybrid approach with automated and semi-automated quoting. I'm biased here, but using a system like MakerOS or using MakerOS, because if you're doing that within the platform and providing an immediate feedback loop to the customer, that's less work that you have to do and less overhead for your business in having to go through a multi-hour process to provide quotes. But especially for more custom service bureau type of work, with MakerOS, we have the added ability to have a customer create a quote and then you can basically have the customer submit it for approval. So then you as a service bureau can add either additional services on top of it, which can increase your margins, or you can provide just additional more value on top of that. And having them, let's say if a customer chose to print let's say a computer case out of PLA, but they wanted to be, impact resistant, probably not the best idea. So after they quote that, you can create a semi-automated quote and add a different option for the customer and suggest actually maybe PC ABS might be the better choice. So all in all, from that polling question, to get straight to it, I don't recommend doing it with just spreadsheets, definitely not over the phone. I highly do not recommend basing your pricing based off of competitors, because at that point you're just starting to commoditize yourself, especially as a custom service bureau. Whereas if it would maybe be more appropriate to base or be more price competitive with competitors if you were a much more commoditized type service that was printing, one or two parts all the time for a select few type of clients.
And I think we've got time for one final question. What if I have a business that balances both commodity and service jobs? How would you recommend I rate myself?
Yeah, I think, in the rating scale that we had in the spreadsheet, if you're basically in between, I mean, what I would categorize, someone in between would be someone that does high volume production runs in, 100, small to medium parts, concurrently doing, custom jobs, customers coming in for prototypes or different type of engineering work. You can provide, again, in MakerOS, different service types for different types of customers that require different types of services. It's kind of a long answer, but more or less, if you're in the middle, just rate yourself in the middle of 2.5. You can put yourself at a 3. What I personally would suggest is always, in my personal opinion, focus on value. The more value you add to your clients, the more value would be given back to your business. And I know that's very subjective, but people's perception and your perception of even your own business can help influence how you run it. So if your customers are confident in your business, you will also be confident in your business, and you'll be able to make smart decisions to how to scale.
Thanks so much, Mike. All of your guidance is really appreciated. And do you want to close with any final words about the spreadsheet? We've included the links, and we just included an email address for people to access. What should they do next?
Yeah, if you want to download that spreadsheet, go to that bit.ly/MakerOS profit, and that'll lead you to the Google Sheet that I was working on, and you'll be able to hit the file button and then be able to download it as an Excel spreadsheet or create a copy if you have a Google account so that you can just work on it online. It also has a link within that spreadsheet to the 3D printing pricing calculator. That way you can go through and workshop through the pricing and the costing model that we did for the first half of the discussion. And then one last thing I would say is if you enjoyed this conversation, there's a whole lot more. You can't shut me up when it comes to machines and pricing models and helping to scale your business. And if you ever want to talk, just shoot me an email. And if you want to request a demo for your first 30 days for free on MakerOS, go to our website and go ahead and fill out the form. We look forward to speaking with you.
Mike, thanks so much. It was really great to have you today.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask all of our participants to stay on. Let's go ahead and get your feedback on today's session.